Hello everyone, welcome, welcome. Okay, give me just a minute, you guys. I'm just making sure I have my comments up and pulling them up on my laptop, and then we are going to get started. Okay, it looks like I've got the comments. Hi, Katie. Welcome. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. So, first of all, we are going to make a super cute project together today. We're going to be using some really new fun products from the newest release. We're going to be using this super adorable Annie Feline Spooky, available in the shop now. We are going to be using from a previous release the Spider Web Shaker add-on stencil, die. We're going to be using the new Foliage Leaf stencil. Oh, yes, more will be coming in, Katie. They will be restocked. Hello, Betty. Welcome. Okay, then we're also going to be using the edger dies to make our little Memory Dex card. We're going to be using this little die right here. We're going to be using the Sweet word die. The corner edgers dies, which is this little die right here with the little ticket stub. The outline die that goes with the super cute Annie Feeling Spooky. We're going to be using the new Pumpkin Shaker die. This one's super adorable. If you guys don't have this yet, you definitely need this one. It's one of my favorites. We're going to be using the Shaker Basics set number 1. We're going to be using this little die right here. It coordinates perfectly with the spider web add-on. You can see they match up perfectly. And that is everything we're going to be using. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So what I did first is I cut out just a little piece of chipboard. Hello, Joanne. A piece of chipboard. This I cut at 4.25 inches wide by 4 inches tall. This, I will put all the measurements below, so if you miss it. So first I kind of did some of this previously. I took this little edger die and I lined it up on the corners and I ran it through my machine to get that. This bottom border here, I took the edger dies, this one right here, and then I just took this and I ran it right through. So that gave me my Memory Dex, which is really cool for this set because you can make them as tall or as small as you want. And then you also have like your little planner tab or little memory book tab, which is really fun to use too. So that's what I did to get this. This is just a lightweight chipboard, and that's going to be the base of our Memory Dex today. Then what you're going to need is you're going to need from the basic shaker set right here, you're going to take this one, you're going to cut 2 black cardstock. This is 110-pound cardstock, 2 of those. We're going to be making a little treat bag we're going to be putting on the edge of our little Memory Dex card. Hi, Brenda. Okay, so we have both of those. Then you're going to take another piece of that same 110-pound cardstock because you want it sturdy enough for the little trick-or-treat bag. I cut this at 2 inches wide by 11.5 inches in length, and you're going to want to score on the 2-inch side at 1/2 inch and then flip it and score at 1/2 inch, and then on the 11.5 inch side I scored at 4 1/4 inches and 7 1/4 inches. Again, if you guys missed that, I will put that in the bottom of the comments after the live. Then you're just going to reinforce those score lines. This is going to make these little sides into a little trick-or-treat bag or slash box for the front of our Memory Dex. So then you're just going to reinforce the score lines. I'm going to fold it over on the first one. We're going to cut our little corners here just to cut down on the bulk. So I'm just going to trim across from the edge to that first score line there. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the opposite side, just like that. And then you have something that looks like this. I'm going to do the same thing with this little piece here Again, I'm going to trim from the corner where the little fold is to the edge. Flip it over, do the same thing on this opposite side, just like that. So now we have the little base of our box. So now we're going to assemble this, and the easiest way to do this is you are going to take, let me move this stuff out of the way. I'm going to take my little glue here, dries clear adhesive. You could use score tape, whatever you want to use. Just something that's sturdy that will hold on, because this is going to be the base of our box. You're going to line up one of your die cuts, the black ones, and you're going to want to make sure you put it face side down so you can see the pretty stitching. You're going to flip it to the wrong side, and then we are going to go ahead and we're going to just add some adhesive to this first tab here. Make sure you get right along the edge. And then you're just going to line this up right edge to edge, and then just push that little flap down. And then make sure it adheres. We're just going to grab a little bone folder and just go over that little edge there. So now we have that first flap done. Now we're going to flip it over and do the opposite side exactly the same. So again, flip this to the wrong edge facing down. You are going to add adhesive right here to the little tab. Line it up, edge to edge, and then press that little tab down. And I like using the liquid adhesive because if you accidentally shift it like I did just there, you can have a few seconds to reline it back up and make sure it's even. Okay, so now we're going to press down on that little tab there. So now we have those two little bottom parts of the box. I made this really thin 1 inch on the inside because we wanted to keep it small for the little Memory Dex card, just to slide in a few little goodies. If you're making full treat bags, you can obviously make this bigger. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add adhesive to the two side tabs. And we're just going to adhere our little box together. So just like that. Folding that in, using my bone folder to make sure it's nice and sturdy. I'm going to do the same thing with this opposite edge. Just line it up and press down. And now we're going to do the same thing on these top edges. We're just going to add the adhesive. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to add it to both sides and then just line them both up at the same time. Okay, so now we're just going to line these up and finish closing up our little bag here. Making sure edges match up, and they do. Okay, so now we have our little tiny treat bag. Hi Ebony, welcome. Okay, so now we're going to decorate the front of our treat bag. I cut from that same die another little coordinating pattern paper. It can be any style, whatever you decide to go with. And I'm just going to adhere this to the front of our little treat bag. Just like this, lining it up. And pressing down. And then I'm going to take the matching little frame here, which was a spider web frame, and I'm going to add adhesive to that and then add that on top of the front of the treat bag. Just adding a couple little dots there. And you could make this a shaker too if you just pop it up with foam tape or do some extra chipboard layers if you wanted this to be a shaker. So now I'm just going to flip this and then press down on the inside to really get a good press down of all those little delicate pieces. So there we go. So now we have our little tiny treat bag. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and distress our Memory Dex card base. So I have this here, our Memory Dex card. We're going to take the stencil, which was the brand new one, Foliage Leaves, right here, and I'm going to be adding some texture to it. Now this stencil is so cool because it could be for Halloween or for fall. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it just sideways slightly so it's not straight across. And I'm going to be using some Distress ink in Black Soot. I'm also going to be using a blending brush. So I have this little blending brush here. I like the blending brushes because it really gets down into the grooves of the stencils. Okay, so I've loaded my blending brush. And now I'm just going to start on the edge of the stencil towards the center, just doing small circular motions to add some texture to this chipboard. This also looks really great with texture paste. And if you don't have the Distress inks, you could use regular ink pads as well. I've also done this with just the plain Memento ink or the Stamp Anything ink. It works really nice. So again, just small circular motions. It does not have to be perfect. We're just adding a little bit of texture to the back of this. I really wanted to use the heavier weight, especially for a Memory Dex card, so that's why I am distressing this chipboard. Okay, so just around the edge. Hi Sheila. Hi Beth. Okay, so I'm just blending from the edge. We don't need to worry about getting the whole stencil. I just really wanted to give an impression of a few of these leaves. I'm going to flip this and then do this opposite corner here. Just blending along the edges mostly. This center portion is really going to be covered a lot by our little elements for the Memory Dex card. Okay, so that's good. We just wanted to add a little bit of texture. I like leaving some areas darker and some lighter. I think that always gives a lot of interest to your chipboard. So there is that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just distress the edges. I'm just going to use a little blending sponge and just pick up some of that Black Soot ink and just go around the edges. This is completely optional. This is something I do on all my projects. You could also do that same stencil on the back of your Memory Dex card too. Hi Tammy, welcome. So again, just going right around my edges here. Okay, so now we have that all ink blended. I'm just going to quick clean up this ink so it doesn't get all over the rest of the project. So now we have our base card done. We have our little gift bag done for the front of the Memory Dex card. That's going to look so fun popped up like that. And now I want to add that little pumpkin. So you guys can see here on this little card I made, I did this pumpkin in the oranges with the green and the little top. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. I'm not going to be doing the shaker, just this top element because I thought it would look really cute nested behind this little treat bag. So that is what we're going to do now. So to do that, you're going to want that pumpkin shaker add-on dies, which was right here from the new release. And you're going to cut that from watercolor paper. I just use Canson watercolor paper. That's what I like. It's 140-pound cold press, I believe. So I cut the bottom pumpkin, I cut the top leaf, I cut the little stem swirl, and then the main stem I cut from that same chipboard we did the base from, just so I could make it look kind of like a rustic stem to match. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to blend this pumpkin first. You are going to need Distress Oxide and Spiced Marmalade, Distress Ink and Carved Pumpkin, and then last but not least, Distress Ink and Candied Apple. So that is what we're going to use for this one. I'm going to put these to the side here. We're going to start with the Spiced Marmalade, and this time I'm using a blending sponge, and I'm just going to load it up. I'm going to start from the bottom edge and then the top edge. So I'm going to start small circles, blending towards the center. I do not want to blend this whole thing. I want to still give light and shadow across this pumpkin to give it more form. And if you guys know me, you know I love doing distress inks on pretty much all my die cuts. I love being able to match my project colors perfectly, and then also giving that extra dimension as opposed to just a plain plain tone die cut. So again, concentrating more color here on this outer edge, letting it go towards more lighter yellow, almost orange, orange, almost yellow to the middle. So there I have that, and I'm going to flip this to the opposite side, and I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. So again, starting off the mat, blending towards the center, not covering up all of my white area in the center. I'm leaving about 1/4 of an inch. Just like that, small circles. Blending up towards the center and concentrating more ink on this bottom edge of this pumpkin. Okay, so now once we've done that, with this lightest color tone, you can take a couple of quick swipes just across that white area to tone it down if it is too drastic white there for you, just to tone it. You can always add more ink, but you can't, it's a lot harder to take it away. So that's why I wait to the very end to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my carved pumpkin, which is my next color tone. I'm going to build up that color just on the bottom and right edges. Just like that, not following it all the way up. I'm only shading maybe this bottom, I'd say 1/4 inch, maybe 1/2 inch. Same thing here. And now we're going to be using the candied apple. And I'm just going to be using for this a blending brush because I just want to give just a little bit of this to the edge. We're going to tone it out down, so don't worry if it looks a little bit drastic right now. It's going to visually blend with that bottom edge. So see already how it's starting to go a really deep orange. It doesn't even look red anymore. We're going to do that to both sides. And I'm using the blending brush because it gives it more of a gradual buildup of color as opposed to the sponge. It's going to apply much more color. So there we go. Okay, so now that pumpkin is all done being blended. Let me move these little inks to the side here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to quick activate the ink on this before we let it dry too much so we can get those really awesome little water droplet marks. I'm just going to use an old toothbrush. I'm going to spritz it off camera just a couple of times. Then I'm just going to take a tissue and just dab off those ink drops after I let it sit for just a few seconds. And now I'm just going to clean up this ink really quick. And you can see how cool that turned out. Okay, so now we're going to set this guy aside. We're going to finish the rest of the pumpkin. We're going to do the leaves and the little curly cube next. And for that, I'm going to be using Distress Ink in Twisted Citron and Cracked Pistachio. I'm going to start with the Twisted Citron. I always start my lightest to my darkest on my buildup of inks. Load up the sponge. And we're going to do the leaf first. Remember, we're going to build up to white in the middle. So we're just going to ink the edges and let the white of the paper act as our highlight. So again, starting on the edges, small circular motions. I'm going to leave a small area in the center, just like if we were coloring with Copic markers. So just like that around the edges, building up that color. You can build up as much color as you want for whatever color tone of these leaves you want or how dark you want them to be. Okay, so that's my first color buildup. That was with the Twisted Citron. Now I'm going to move on to Cracked Pistachio. And remember, if we want to tone down this white, after you're done blending the edges, you take your lightest color and you just swipe up the paper just a couple of times to tone that down. Okay, so now I'm going to be using the Cracked Pistachio. And again, starting at the edge of my little leaves and blending small circular motions. Again, this edge here, this edge here, And then we're going to finish off with this bottom edge. I'm really just hitting the very tips of this leaf. And then I'm going to take that same color and I'm just going to go around the edges of my die cut to deepen those leaf tips even further. There we go. Hi Dana, welcome. Okay, so just like that, that's our little leaf, and if you wanted it just a little bit darker in the center, you can always go back over with that Twisted Citron. I think I'm going to blend out just a tiny bit more color. I want a little bit more pop of green. So you can go back over that area just slightly. And then I'm also going to just use that toothbrush and quick activate this ink. So I'm just going to spritz it off camera super fast, let it sit for just a second, and then dab off to get that little texture dots. So now we have our pumpkin and our first leaf. We're going to do this little green stem swirly, same way, Twisted Citron first. And I could have done all the Twisted Citron all together. That would save time, so probably going back I would have done that. I'm just going to go across this whole thing with the Twisted Citron. And since it's so delicate, I'm really just kind of pressing down on it and barely pulling the pressure across. You don't want to bend this little die cut. But it also helps that I did cut it out of the watercolor paper. It does hold up a lot stronger, and you can actually do a lot of ink blending on them. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. As you can see, I'm going from the sides to the center. So the center I'm leaving lighter. The edges, I'm building up that color. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my cracked pistachio, just like before. And again, starting on the edges, like that. I'm going to do the same thing on this opposite side. Oops. And then I'm going to take my ink and I'm just going to delicately get these edges just to add a little bit more depth and contrast. Same thing on this opposite side. Okay, so now we have our little curly, we have our leaf pumpkin, and now we're going to do the stem. Okay, so to do this, I've shown you guys this a couple of times. Let me quick clean that off. You're going to take your little stem. This is Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I'm going to take the ink pad itself, and I'm going to pull this ink pad across this die cut, just to give it this worn look. If you get some areas darker than others, that's perfectly fine. It gives just a more rustic appearance, but it picks up the texture of this chipboard. You can see with just minimal blending. So that is it for our little stem. This also works really great if you're doing like wood grain, for an edge of a frame for a card, or even the card base layers. I do that a lot. Okay, so now we can go ahead and assemble our little pumpkin. We're going to take this, we're going to add the stem first. So I'm going to take my dry as clear adhesive and my little stem here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to the back. I'm going to line it up to the top of my little pumpkin there and press down. Now I'm going to take my little curly cue, add a little bit of adhesive to the back of it. Actually get a couple of these little sides there. I'm going to line this up just kind of, see, I think I want it to go this way. Just like that, layered over just slightly. And then for the leaf, I'm going to pop that up on a little bit of foam tape just for some extra dimension. I'm going to grab my foam tape here and just cut off a tiny little square. And I'm going to add that to the back of my leaf. And then just position this where I want on my little pumpkin. probably right about there. And now we have our little pumpkin layer. So now we can go ahead and start assembling our little Memory Dex cards. We're going to take our bottom base part of the card. We can figure out how we want this to be. I think probably something like that. Kind of turning that sideways. Get the placement you want first. And then what I'm going to do is remove this. I'm going to keep this pumpkin exactly where I have it. One of those little tips I've shown you guys a few times. I'm going to take a little piece of scrap paper. I'm just going to take my adhesive and I'm going to add some to the back of the scrap paper. And then I'm just going to slide this under my die cut. This is going to glue it down with all that extra glue, and then you're not worrying about moving it, shifting it. It's exactly where you wanted it. Oh, thank you so much, Katie. Okay, so same thing on this side. Just adhering that. And now it's exactly where we wanted it to be. And now we can go ahead and adhere our little treat box. I'm going to add some adhesive to the back of it. I don't want to go all the way to the top because it is going to be hanging off the edge just slightly. So we're going to layer this just a little bit to the side there. We want to make sure we don't cover up these little Memory Dex holes because you still want to be able to fit it in your Memory Dex album. And this is also where you probably want to measure the size of your Memory Dex holder to make sure that this is going to actually fit. If you have restrictions, you know, something like this underneath this mat, you could line it up and make sure it stays within, you know, 5 inches, 6 inches, whatever the size of your holder is. So there we go. That's all glued down. And now I have this super adorable little sentiment suite that I cut. Again, I'm going to add a little bit of adhesive to it. And I'm going to have this kind of nested off the side here, I think. So I'm just going to place that kind of kitty corner onto my Memory Dex card. And now, last but not least, we are going to do some coloring. We're going to color up this super cute little image here, and we were going to put her right on the top. This Memory Dex card, you can see, has perfect size to put some little candy, some treats, maybe like a little stamp set or something, and send this to a friend for Halloween. So let's get started on the coloring. We're going to set this aside for just a moment. So first of all, I went ahead and I stamped up this super cute image here. And I went ahead and cut her out with the coordinating die. The correct item for the Memory Dex I use the edger dies. So right here, this edger die, you can make whatever size Memory Dex card you want. This is called, you know, just edger dies. Look that up in the shop. I will link all the products down below too. Okay, so we're gonna get started on this super cute little Annie Feline Spooky. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you guys can see better. Oh, Sheila, the Memory Dex holder is, I will have to show you later. I can't show it yet. It's a big surprise. So it's coming up and you will see it in a future project. Okay. Okay, so here we go. We are going to go ahead. I think that's close enough there. Okay, I'm going to start off with my skin tones first, and as you guys know, when I'm coloring, I always go around the eyes with my marker, and this is just a mechanical pencil. I'm going to start with E04, and I'm going to go around the shadowed areas very first. I always start with the skin tone. We're going to color her up as Annie, so all set for Halloween. So all I'm doing is I'm going around the hairline, anywhere there would be shadows, and just pulling those lines through. Again, E04. And again here on the side and on the bottom part of her little chin there. And see where her hand is overlapping, you want to make sure you add a little shadow. Usually I don't connect right there with my darkest skin tone, but because she has her hand there, I am pulling that shadow a little bit further. Now with the glasses are going to cast a darker shadow on her face. So we want to make sure we pull that shading in, especially here like this top rim of her glasses. You're going to pull this shading through here on this top edge, and then it's going to pull around on this right side. So what I'm imagining is my light source is coming from up here on this upper left corner and coming down. So here too, underneath her glasses there, and pulling it through that shadow on that side edge, underneath the brim of her little, or the rim center portion of her glasses, you're going to have a shadow area there. Also right here on the side of the edge of her face, I'm going to pull a little hint of that shadow pulling through there. Okay, so now we're going to get her hands. So underneath her little cat suit here, pulling that through, and here as well. There we go. And that was with E04. Now we're going to move on to my next color in the lineup, E11. Oh, thanks, Jana. Yeah, I love the little small projects, and they're so fun, especially, you know, sending to friends or just doing one for each holiday and adding them to a little, you know, a little Memory Dex holder is really fun to put up on your desk and just flip through, you know, small little projects you do. Okay, so I'm just pulling the shading through. I'm making just a line right across my previous shading, but making it a little bit further down towards the white area to start creating form. I'm turning my page as I go so that it's comfortable for me as I'm coloring. Do whatever is comfortable for you. And at this point, this is where I'm going to pull the shading through across the bottom of her little chin there. And I'm going over those areas a couple times if you want to really tone down and blend that previous shading line. And then same thing with her glasses, you can't forget that. So I'm going to be going along this top edge. And same thing with this opposite side. And then this right edge as well. And now you guys, with the Memory Dex dies, I know there's some other companies that do make different versions. The reason why I love the Stamp Anything one is because it is sized as a border die. So you can cut your Memory Dex card as large or as small as you want. You are not stuck to just one single size, which I love. You can change the shape. I mean, you could use this on the circle die. You could use this on any other kind of fun shaker shapes you have, or card-based shapes, and then just add your little, you know, Memory Dex punch so it can fit right in your little album. So that's why I love the Stamp Anything one, is because it's so versatile. It also works great if you already have cards you want to turn into Memory Dex that are, you know, flatter cards. You could always run that bottom edge through your machine. Okay, so again, I'm just going over those shading lines, blending them out if I feel they need a little bit more. This is with E11. And now I'm going to move on to E21. And I'm going to be doing the same thing, just going over the shading I previously did, pulling it just slightly further. I'm kind of coloring on the side of my marker at this point, just kind of pulling the shading towards the center and going over those lines. I'm doing more of like a flicking motion like this as I'm going. So when you see me doing that, that's what I'm doing. This is a stamp. She is in the shop right now. I think she might be out of stock, but she's coming. Make sure you sign up for the notifications. But it's Annie Feline Spooky. again, right here, pulling through. Just like that, and then on this bottom part of her glasses, and then you cannot forget pulling that same shading through on the glasses. You don't want to flick quite as far since you still want them to appear that they're clear, but you do want to indicate that there is some depth. And getting her little hands there. So that was with E21. Now we're going to move on to E00. Yes, Betty, Rolodex, yes. I've seen some really cute Rolodex holders too, like vintage ones. Okay, so E00. Now at this point I'm going to start flicking towards the center a little bit further. I'm going to start halfway through my previous shading, and I'm going to just flick it towards the center, pulling that color through. And you can see these lines are where I'm actually pulling a little bit further into her face there. Not quite a small area I'm covering, it's a little bit wider, about the same size as all of the previous shading. And again, just small flicks starting in the center of your previous shading. You don't want to go all the way to the edge, you guys. If you start all the way back where your E04 was, it is actually going to push that color away, and you can get small little islands of white in there, which are really hard to cover up. So that's why you want to really just pull this ink towards the center. Okay, so then right here on the underneath part of her face, I'm going to do the same thing, pulling this towards the center. This is going to be smaller because it's right underneath her chin. I don't want to get up into her little tongue there. Same thing here. I'm going to pull that shading around the rest of these glasses. And then here underneath her glasses, I'm going to pull that shading into, but not flick quite as far. Just blend out this previous line. And by having those whites of the eyes drawn, it really helps with knowing how far you can go with your shading without actually going into where you don't want colored. Oh, thank you so much, Allison. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so same thing there, making sure we get that top edge of her glasses with more shading because the light is coming from above, maybe the moon, but there's going to be more of a shadow underneath this top rim of the glasses. So there we go. We want to make sure we get her little hands shaded, just like that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to E000, and I have it right here. We are going to go over those same areas as before. So remember, halfway through our shading tones, so our last color, the end of it starts there to there. So we're going to start about halfway. We're going to do those same flicking motions towards the center, but not covering up all of our white. Again, going around the edge, pulling that color towards the center. And then same thing on this bottom edge here. Going over my previous shading. And then I'm going to pull this line across the top of her mouth and then down towards her little nose. You can see her little nose there, still kind of the white of the paper. We will be coloring that in a moment, but with our very lightest highlighting color. So again, going over those areas, as you can see, I'm cleaning off my marker in between, especially where you have these deep dark glasses or where we have the pencil line. Just in case you pick up any of that color, you do not want it to transfer to the rest of the face. So I'm cleaning my marker in between doing that. Going carefully around her eyes. The glasses have the lens, so it is casting a little bit of a shadow onto her face. So that's why I'm finishing filling in around her eyes with that E000. Now I'm going to make sure I get her hands, her neck, and her other hand against her face there. Now we're going to move on to our last color, which is E0000. I just refilled my 0, so that's why it says 0, but that's not really what it is. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and finish filling in any white areas we have left of her skin tone. So up here at the very top edge of her glasses, her hands, her neck, and her little nose. And if you need to go over a couple of times, you can to tone it down if it's still a little bit too much contrast. Her little hands and neck. Okay, so now I'm going to go back up my color ladder to really build up the skin tone a little bit more. I'll go over that one more time. Okay, so now I'm going to move back to my E000, and I'm just going to go over those previous areas. You don't have to be quite as careful this time because you're just building up that color. You're just making sure you're covering over exactly where you covered before with those previous colors. I found the second step of color really makes the images pop, so I always add at least 2 layers. Here by her nose, and then underneath her little chin there. And whatever you're doing on her face, do not forget to do on her hands and her neck. Hi Debbie, welcome. Okay, now back to E00. And again, I start on the side and then pull that shading towards the center, small flicks. Just like that. And then same thing underneath her little glasses, pulling that color down. And the little center portion above her nose, the side of her glasses and where her cheeks would be, and then of course underneath her glasses where there'll be a little shadow, pulling it towards the center, and then her hands. And then we're going to move on to E21. And again, if you guys miss these colors, I will list them all after the live. Pulling the shading towards the center again. Coloring on the side of my marker, flicking towards the center. Pulling that shading underneath her glasses there. In the top portion, and then again on the sides of her little face, her neck, and her hand. Okay, now we're going to move on to E11. And this time we are going to just be going over these lines. I'm just literally drawing over them. I'm not flicking at this point because these are our darker colored skin tones. I'm just reinforcing that previous shading we had because a lot of it did get blended out from those previous colors. I'm going over her hand, and there we go. And then last but not least, our E04, which was our darkest shadow color. And you're just going to just re-add in those shadows. So just pull those colors back through. You don't have to do all of the shadows, but you do want to get some for contrast. So again, here on the side of her face, her little hand, the bottom part, and then her neck where the hand is overlapping. Just like that. Okay, so now we are all done with her skin tone. Now we're going to move on to her hair. And for this, I want to do the kind of black hair, but I think I want to add in maybe some orange, like an orange highlight or something. We'll see. Yeah, let's do an orange highlight. So I'm going to start with my oranges because if you're doing black color tones like I have here, once you put the black through, it's so easily picked up by your other Copic markers. So we want to make sure we avoid that. So you do your lightest colors for your hair first and then move to your darkest. So I'm going to start with E08. This is going to be my darkest orange color. I'm going to do, I think, a highlight here in the center of her hair and then do it kind of alternating throughout. So I'm going to pull some little color strands, just like this, in this section here. And then if I'm going to alternate it, I'm going to do an orange on this section. And then I think I'm going to have a big chunk of black there, and then maybe do these little side highlights, orange as well. Just for something kind of funky and fun. Again, I'm going to pull the strands from the bottom and the top. So now, since we're at this top portion, I'm going to pull those strands from the top down. Just follow the coloring that is already there on the stamp image. It makes it really easy to know what your sections of hair are. So now I need to mirror this to this opposite side. Oops, see, I went in this section here and I wasn't supposed to. That's okay. It's since we're going to black, we will easily be able to cover over that. So now I can do, let's see, I want that section black. I'll do this section orange. And then I'm going to do the larger black section, and then that right there. Okay, so then we need to mirror the same thing in the top of her hair. I'm going to do this little portion coming out here in the black. Do that there, black. Or I mean orange. And then this opposite section here, I'll do orange. So just pulling those colors through. That center I'll leave black. And then this side portion I'll do orange. Okay, so now we've mapped out those colors. I'm just going to quickly go over that one little section that I accidentally pulled the color through in the black, just so I don't keep blending it out and covering up my white. So I know I wanted this section here black, not orange. So I'm just quickly adding my darkest shading right there, just so I know that was supposed to be a black section. I'll just be really careful when I color around that area with the rest of the orange. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to YR07, and I'm going to pull these lines slightly further towards the center of her hair, just like that, and then doing the same thing from the opposite side. Oops, I forgot my darkest tone there. I was just grabbing my previous color. I forgot to get this little edge of her hair right there, and then where it was layered over the glasses. That was with the E08. Okay, so now I can finish pulling those colors through. Starting at where you previously shaded and just trace over that line, but make it extend a little bit further. I'm going to turn my paper this way and get this side edge. Same thing with these little hairs here, just flicking it towards the center, pulling those lines. Just like that. I'm going to get this one orange too, just so it blends in. And then pulling any lines from the top that I've missed down. As you can see, I'm turning my page as I go because it makes it easier to pull the lines towards myself than flicking away from myself. I can get a better thicker to thinner line that way. Do whatever is comfortable for you. Okay, so now we have those little orange highlights in there. We're going to move on to our next color, which is our YR04. And I'm going to do the same thing but not connect them. So make sure you just pull those lines a little bit further. You really don't want to pull far on this orange here because your highlight is almost gone. Some of these areas are so small. Okay, and then last but not least for the hair tone, we're going to be using R02. Oh, the top of her eyes and her ears could be a spider. Yeah, that would be cool to make her up as a spider. That would be cute. Okay, so I'm just going to pull these lines again. This is with R02. And again, I'm just pulling them down, but still leaving a small white highlight in these sections. You don't want to cover up all your whites because you still want light pulling through. Okay. Just like that. And then to really make this color pop, sometimes with the oranges, I like taking my EO4, which is my skin tone, and just re-going over the darkest contrast hair strands one last time with this. So that's what I'm going to do here, and you're going to really see these sections of hair kind of stand out a lot more. And this is with EO4. So again, pulling those little lines, I'm coloring on the tip of my marker, pulling those lines through. Just my previously drawn darkest little shadow lines. These should be your shortest lines, the ones you did very first. And again on this side. Okay, now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to just pull these lines from the bottom part of her, from the top of her head towards these hair strands. Okay, that looks good. So now we've got those little orange highlights in there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add the black highlights or little strands to her hair. So I'm going to start with 100. And just like before I did in those little sections, I'm just going to pull these little lines, hair lines from the side, following the curve that's already there for you. Just like that. And again, I'm turning my page as I go. And then on this opposite side here, okay, and then I'm going to turn and get these bottom ones. I'm going to pull these towards myself, just a couple of little lines. Some sections can have one line, some can have two. Vary the length, but don't pull it too far. Just like that. And then I'm going to pull these lines on the bottom of her ponytail. And then here on the side of her ponytail. And then making sure to get the little top of this section there. Okay, so now we have those lines in. Now we're going to move to C7. Right here, I'm going to pull those lines a little bit further as before. Just blending them up towards the center. Now if you wanted this all one tone, not the multiple highlights, you would just do the same thing I'm doing with just these, whatever hair tone color blend you're doing. You would just go across all the sections. So again, here I'm going to pull these down, not connecting them. Here at the top, and on this opposite side. And then this little ponytail, we can't forget. And then the opposite way. And then pulling down from this bottom section. I'm going to pull this line a little bit further. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to move on to C3. And again, just like before, just pull those lines down, but do not connect them. it's going to visually connect them kind of for you, so you don't have to worry about actually pulling them all the way through. Okay, and then same thing on the side of the ear, and here on her little ponytail. Just like that. And then last but not least, we're going to use C1 just to go over a couple of those little sections. I'm just going to pull a line straight across in a couple of the areas to break up that highlight. And as you see, I'm cleaning off my marker in between each just in case I picked up any of that darkest shadow. I don't blend it through the rest of my coloring. So there we go. So now we have her hair all done in those fun little color tones. Now we are going to color the pumpkin. I don't want to color her outfit quite yet. Actually, we'll do the little tongue really fast. I'm going to do RV04. And just following through the underneath part of her tongue. I'm also going to get the underneath part of her little ears there. Just like that. And now I'm going to be using RV21 and just dabbing right over that little tongue there, still leaving the white highlight at the top. Same thing with these ears. And last but not least, RV000. And at this point, I'm just going to dab over the top of that right corner edge, and then same thing on these little ears. And then last but not least, I like to take my darkest color one more time, RV04. Oh, thank you so much, Dana. And I'm just going to dab the very right corner with one more dot of that dark pink just to make it pop a little bit more. Okay, so now her inside of the ears are done, her skin, her hair. Now we are going to do the pumpkin. Now remember what I said, we always want to start with the lightest color first, so we don't do color transfer. So we're going to start with the eyes first, since we're doing them in a yellow tone. I'm going to start with Y17, and I'm going to just color this bottom shadowed area because I want it glowing. Now it's okay if you go out just a little bit out of the lines here, because it does actually end up looking really cool, like the eyes are glowing. So I'm following a line through on this bottom edge and this right edge, and I'm pulling that color up into where this little carved section is, just a little bit. And then same thing here on the bottom of this pumpkin. I'm going to pull this through on this right edge. I went right over that little highlighted area. I'm going to do a little bit the same here, just a little bit more into those sections where the carving area is, because that light is shining onto that. And then same thing here on the mouth, making sure I follow through around the edge of the teeth, along the inside, and then barely across this top edge, especially on that little tooth there. Okay, so just like that, and that was with Y17. Now I'm going to move on to Y06, and I'm going to go over those same areas. I'm going to be flicking towards the center, just like I did coloring her face and hair, pulling this color up towards the center, still leaving white in the middle. And then on this opposite edge, just like that. Okay, now we're going to move on to Y00, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to pull this blending forward, still leaving a small white highlight in the very center of these sections, just like that. Okay, so now to finish off, you can see here, I like to add this little texture, like it's kind of sparkling, glowing light. We are going to do that now. I'm going to start off with YR07. And I'm just going to add a couple of little texture dots here to the inside corners, right over my shading. Just like that, vary how big they are, their spacing, some of them layered over each other, but just following your previous blend. If you get some darker ones, that's okay. You can add a couple more to balance it. Same thing here along this bottom edge, down here. And I'm just varying and just adding them for texture. This is something I love doing in my coloring. Add one more right there. Okay, so I did that. Now I'm going to move on to back to my Y17, and I'm going to go over those same dots just like before, but spreading that out just a little bit further. On this side as well. And then here where her little pumpkin is. Oh, thank you so much, Allison. Okay, and then last but not least, I'm going to be using Y06. And again, same as before, going over those same areas, extending, changing my variation of dots. It looks better the more you overlap to give texture. So there we go. Now we are all done with those little center part of the pumpkin. Look how it kind of sparkles and looks like it's lighting up and illuminating inside of it. Okay, so now we can move on to our pumpkin since that's the next color tone. And for that, we're going to be using those same oranges we used for her hair. I'm going to start with my E08. I'm going to pull these pumpkin texture lines. So for these, you're going to be following almost like the hair, but more spaced out. I'm just going to pull a few little strands along, and then any of these sections that are already drawn out for you, you're going to follow that shading. So if the light's coming from this left edge, you're going to want to, left side, you're going to want to shade the right edges of these little pumpkin sections. So you can see here, I'm going to pull a little bit of shading. I'm going to pull a little bit of shading from the top where her little arm is layered over this pumpkin. So just follow through on the bottom part of that. And here too. And then pulling that shading around on the edges. And I'm going to do the same thing on this opposite side. Making sure to extend those lines. If she has, her arm over it, that line is still going to extend past that. So now we have those lines drawn. We're going to go ahead and flip this over, and we're going to do this opposite side. Oh, thank you so much, Ebony. Okay, so on this side, we're going to pull that shadow line through, and then again, just like before, pull those lines on the side. And then here on this bottom section, we're going to pull those lines up. You want to make sure not to go to where this tooth is, because if you pull the lines up onto the tooth, it's going to, make that tooth kind of blend in and it won't show up as well. So same thing on this opposite edge, pulling those pumpkin lines towards me, and then on this far edge, just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this shading. So I didn't finish pulling this line. I need to do that. And then there's going to be a little shading underneath these little sections that are cut out. So I'm going to pull the line on that side, the shadow line on the opposite side. So all of the right edges. are going to get a little bit of this darkest shading shadow. Same thing here. And on this right edge. And then of course along this very right edge I want to add a little bit darker shadow to both sides. And then on the teeth, we can't forget those. So this inside portion, not this little outer carving lip, you just want to indicate that there is a shadow there. And same thing with that tooth. Okay, so that is our darkest shading for the pumpkin. Now we're going to move on to YR07. And we are going to pull the shading towards the bottom, just like before. So we're going to first go over the main form of the pumpkin. So anywhere there's these big main sections, the bottom of the pumpkin, we're going to pull that shading through to make sure we really have that defined for the form. This shading is going to go all around the edge here, and then you have this section here, and then of course this bottom edge, pulling it around but not connecting this side, and then this bottom portion there too. Now on this right edge of this section you are going to still want some shading, so we're going to pull that up into this next section. This is kind of where the two section shading overlaps. So here on this tooth and the opposite tooth. And then again, you're going to want to go over the shading that was on the eyes to really make them pop, and the nose. Okay, so now we can pull these lines. Oh, thank you, Katie. I appreciate it. Now I'm going to go back over these lines. I'm coloring on the side of my marker so that these pumpkin lines are a little bit thicker than the usual like hair lines I do. So you can see if I'm pulling a pumpkin line, I'm on the side of my marker pulling like that. And that's what we're doing to indicate more of texture than just like small little strands. So again, I'm pulling those down towards the bottom, following the way these little pumpkin sections curve. Same here, pulling these ones down, making sure to get that shading underneath your hand. If there's little sections like this, you're going to have a little bit of shading coming down. Just like that, same thing here. And then these, because you have that shadow line. And now we're going to go ahead and flip this, and we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. So we're going to pull these lines towards the center, going over these same sections. You have to be a little bit more controlled and careful on this bottom edge of this pumpkin, just because you don't really have far to pull that color. Okay. And there we go. So that was with YR07. Now we're going to move on to YR04. And we're going to do the same thing, just kind of going over these sections, pulling those same lines we just did, extending them a little bit further, starting where our shadow is. Pulling that color across, but not covering all of our whites. And you can see this color is building up. And it's really starting to get more of the form of like a pumpkin in the night. Okay, so then same thing on this opposite side, pulling those tones towards the center. And then of course this upper edge, I'm going to pull a little shadow across it at this time, just because that lip of that pumpkin would still have a small shadow. And now I'm going to pull some shading across these little inner areas. Anywhere there's a little corner, I'm going to use this same orange just to get the corners shaded so that they look like they match with the rest of this pumpkin. pulling some shading down from the top roof of the mouth and across the sides, edges, and then the inside of the little pumpkin there. Okay, and now we are going to move on to RO2. And this is where we're going to kind of use some lines to kind of connect certain areas and go over the previous shading. It's okay if you still have a few little white sections there. We're going to be using a colorless blender in a moment to really blend out and lighten those areas. Again, pulling that shading on the inside creases of where those little eye cutouts are. And then going over anywhere there's a shadow area. This is going to help smooth out your previous blending too. Okay, so just like that. And now the very last thing I do on these pumpkins is I'm going to take my colorless blender, which is 0, and I'm just going to quickly go over these sections to help tone down some of these little lines. So see how that softened those lines there? That's what we're looking for by using this. We're not actually trying to remove color as much as blending out those texture shading marks. So I'm just going over those sections. I'm cleaning off my marker in between. See how it picked up some of that orange, and because I cleaned it off, I got rid of that. I wouldn't want to go right over this lightest section and then have a big line pulled through. So same thing on this section here, just anywhere you had your lightest highlights, this is where you're going to smooth out those areas. And then same thing on these little highlights where the eye cutouts and the mouth cutout are. Okay, so now we've got our main pumpkin done. Oh, thank you, Kathy. And now, again, what I love to do is add in my darkest shadows back in again. So I was going to do E04, because that was my darkest one up here. So I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to pull those top little lines down, just like before, pulling my shadows. This second layer of shadows really I found helps make it pop even more. So same thing here, anywhere her little arm's layered. I'm just re-adding them back in. You don't have to go over all those lines. You just want to get your main shadows that you want to really stand out. So like these teeth edges I do. And then of course I'm going to flip it to the bottom and get these bottom edges here with E04, pulling some of those texture lines back in. And on the side of that pumpkin. Okay, so now we can add in our little texture dots, which I love doing as always. I'm doing E04 for this just like before. I'm going to add a couple of these just randomly so that it mirrors the same kind of like little dots we added to the inside of the pumpkin. This is not necessary. Again, it's something I love doing with my coloring. And there we go. So now we've got this little pumpkin all done. Now all we have left is just her little outfit. So we are going to go ahead and start with our 100, and we're going to add the shadows into her outfit. So I'm just going to go along this bottom edge anywhere. This is why I waited till the very end to do this darkest tones, because look, I'm able to cover up. I had a few little bleed outs of the orange. It's going to be covered right up with this black, but it would be much more obvious if I had that same problem with black into the orange. So I'm covering over the little shadowed areas where her little body goes over this pumpkin, her little foot, and where the tail overlaps. And then along the bottom of this foot, making sure I get these little sections for her feet. And then of course the tail. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow to that arm there to cover up that orange. And then here on her little ears. And on this opposite side, following through on this right edge, I'm going to add the little scrunchie as black. Okay, so now moving on to C7. And we are going to go over those same areas, just extending that shading a little bit further. Pulling on this right side of the arm and across the bottom. Here where her little leg is again, and these areas are so small. I'm really kind of coloring on the tip of my marker to just go over these sections, just so there still is some depth and variation of color. Pulling that shading a little bit further. Same thing here with her little ears. Her scrunchie is like a dot on each side. And then her ears up on this side, we're going to pull it towards the center. And of course right there. Up, and I forgot her shoulder. You want to pull that shadow from her shoulder just a little bit so it looks like it's curving down. Okay, so now we're going to move on to C5. And again, pulling the shading a little bit further, blending over the previous colors. Since it's a small area, it's going to blend out for you a little bit. Making sure not to cover up all your white sections. Even in little small areas like that, you still want to keep a little bit of white. As soon as you cover that white, it's going to show up flat. And that really will compete with the other items in your coloring. So same thing here on the tail, pulling that color through. If you need to blend it a little bit more, you can go over those areas a couple of times if it's too drastic to the C7. And then here on her ears, pulling that color up towards the center. And on this right edge, and then her little scrunchie. Okay, so now we're going to move on to C3 right here, and we're going to go over those same areas just like before, starting in the center of our shading, shading up towards the middle. It's going to pull a little bit of that previous color in, but then also blend out to this lighter tone. And then same thing on her ears, scrunchie, and the top of the ear. Okay, so then we have C1 next. Oh, thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you. I can't wait to see you guys try. If you guys color this up, this girl up, or use this technique, be sure to post and tag me or something. I want to see. Okay, so again, I'm going over these sections. I am not covering up my lightest highlights, as you guys can see. Even on a darker color like this black color, I'm still leaving the light hitting. If you guys have seen, black and white pictures and things, you still see bright white highlights. So that's what we're trying to mirror in our coloring here. So you can see just like that. And then same thing on the ears. Still leaving the very tips of those ears with that white highlight. And if you need to blend out any of these sections, this is the time when you can go over certain areas and smooth out the coloring, just like that. Okay, and then the last thing, we forgot to do the little paws pink, so I'm just going to quickly do that, and then we need to add the shading to our cheeks, which we didn't do either. So RV04. We're almost done, you guys. Thanks for hanging with me. tonight. I love spending time with all of you, and I definitely appreciate all the beautiful comments and all of the projects and inspiration too from you guys. Thank you. Okay, so this was RV21. I just did literally a little dot on there, and I'm going to finish blending out with RV000. And again, just a little dot to blend that out. Now we're going to do her cheeks. So I'm going to start with the RV21. For this, I start with my darkest shadow. I start in the shadow just like before. And I'm just going to do a few little flicks like this. Sorry, like this. That's what I'm doing on this bottom edge of her little cheeks. I'm going to do the same thing on this opposite side, starting underneath her glasses, a little bit above her glasses, because you want it to still pull through like these glasses are kind of see-through. Okay, and then you're going to take your RV000 and we are going to pull and drag that color and blend it out. So like if I was doing here, I would start halfway through on the side of my marker, and I'm going to just flick that out. Do you see how that visually blends that area? We're going to do that same thing here on her cheeks. We're just going to flick this, but just smaller flicks. And even where her glasses are, you still want to add that color. Just like that. And now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Oh, thank you, Ebony. Yep, just keep practicing. It will come. The more you do it, the easier it's going to get and the more confident you get with it. So same thing here on her little side of her face. Okay, so now that's it for the coloring. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a couple of little highlight dots. I love doing this with a Jelly Roll pen. And I'm going to add a couple of little line and dot up here to the top of her ears. I color where the shadow areas kind of are, like where the darkest, because the dots show up better that way. And it makes it almost have this sparkle. So here on the side where her little tongue is, I'm going to add one. Here where the light's hitting on her arm, I'm doing a little line and a dot. And then where her little legs are, her tail is going to have a little highlight shadow. Maybe her shoulder there. I mean, this is fun. You can just play with it for however you think will look good. And I'm going to add a few of these to the pumpkin too. If you add these to some of your other coloring, you need to keep it consistent and keep it going through the rest of your coloring. So I'm adding a few to this sparkle area where the light's coming through, the little teeth. Some of these little sections will get a little highlight, maybe a line and a highlight. So just mix it up. And then of course I almost forgot the little highlight on her eyes. Oh, thank you. I know I love the highlights too on the gel pen accents. I'm adding the little highlight to her eyes. So this is just a small little circle on either side. And then of course, since these are glasses, the glasses are going to have a little reflection. So at this time, you could do like a little dot, maybe like a little line and a dot, a line and a dot, and maybe a little one on the side edge. Just to show that these are glasses, they have reflection. Just like that. Oh, thank you, Kelly. That's so sweet of you. Okay, so since she was already previously cut out, and I just washi taped her to my scrap paper, she's all ready to go on our project. So now we can take our Memory Dex little card here. Let me zoom out just a little bit so you guys can see better again. Okay, and we are just going to add some foam tape to the back of her. Have all my stuff here. I need to find my foam tape. There it is. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit of foam tape to the very back of her to kind of pop her up. I'm just going to add 2 little pieces. I like the dimension, so I'm always doing that with my die cuts and stuff. So I'm going to add her, and then look at my little You know what, I'm going to add 2 pieces of foam tape. I want her up a little bit higher. So I'm going to add 1 more layer. I know, I'm super picky when it comes to that. Sharon's a Memory Dex junkie. Well, hopefully we'll be seeing some fun cards from you guys, Memory Dex cards. Maybe we can get Anne to do a swap or something. That would be really fun. Okay, so I'm just adding her to the side there, pressing her down, and there we go. There is our little Memory Dex card, you guys. Look how cute that is. You can add your little... Sorry guys, my cat's deciding to get into things. Okay, so here is the little treat bag. You can stick little candies in there. You could put little stamps and stuff. I mean, how cute would this be to even give to a friend? You could stick, you know, little things in there. If you had like little shaker pieces and stuff, they could go in there. But super fun. It'll fit right inside your Memory Dex. All right, everybody, thank you so very much for joining me tonight. And I will see you guys again super soon. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Katie. Bye, everyone. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Karen. I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.